So I've told that story quite a few times. It's the story that I felt I had to write. It's the story that first got me into live storytelling in the first place. And it's strange, and it's crazy, and it's maybe a little supernatural, but it's the experience that I had. And the first time I told the story, the entire audience was sold out, and I was drunk off of the energy of the crowd. Every time I paused, I could hear someone laugh, or gasp, or mutter under their breath. I had created something out of my experience that people could connect with. And after I was done, people came up to me and they said, I totally understand that. I, too, have been that lonely. And we didn't need to say much to each other, because we connected right then and there, in that shared experience, in that loneliness. At least, that's what I thought my story was about. That's how I crafted the telling of it. But one woman came up to me and she said, I think you're a medium. And I smiled at her and I said, no, I'm an extra large. And she said, no, I think you're actually a medium. You actually speak to your dead grandparents. I could have laughed her off. I could have said, you're crazy, ghosts don't exist, because I don't really believe in ghosts. But instead, I sat down next to her. Well, what do you mean, I asked. So she told me her story. She told me that she believed in ghosts, that for her, spirits were real, and that she sought them out. She told me about her belief system, about how people laughed at her when she told me this, just like I had thought in my head that she was a little crazy. She told me that for her, my story wasn't about loneliness. It wasn't about that. What it was about for her was the possibility of the fantastic. I hadn't thought that was the theme of my story, but it had allowed her belief system to be edified. We connected. Which brings me to what I want to tell you guys about story and storytelling. Storytelling is the oldest form of communication. We, the collective we told each other stories to teach each other how to hunt and gather, to teach each other about the dangers that lurk in the shadows. We've told each other stories about religion and about our belief systems and about moral ethics. We told stories to warn each other of the harsh realities of life, of war, but also to offer hope. And storytelling has gotten really big again for some reason. We pay people money to sit in an audience with no screens and no projectors and no sound effects, but just to hear people tell a story. Why? I ask myself that every time I get to tell a story. Why are people paying to hear me tell a story? Why am I letting myself get vulnerable on stage in front of people? And then I realized that's the answer. Part of it, at least. Vulnerability. The storyteller shares a piece of him or herself with the audience. I've told numerous stories. I've told stories about really bad first dates that I've gone on that are kind of hilarious, but really what they do is they offer anecdotes for people on this journey in life, just looking for companionship. I've told stories about how I'm going to donate my sperm to 2 lesbian friends who want a kid, and how that decision affected me after a breakup. I've told stories about teaching, and I've told stories about my gay rugby team, and I've told stories about being afraid to date someone who was HIV positive because I didn't know what that meant at the time. And I've heard stories. I've heard stories about people coping with death and loss and grief. I've heard stories about privilege and lack thereof, about people who have fallen in love and people who have fallen out of love. I've heard stories about people who have lied and stolen and cheated. And every time you hear a story, the storyteller you know has the ability to tell an honest truth on stage. And we, as the audience, we expect to hear his or her truth. We take pause. We listen to that story and we see the storyteller's exposure on stage. Sometimes we see it in their bodies, trembling, tears in their eyes, and we see that vulnerability and we accept it. And then that takes us to the second aspect of why story, why now? And that's empathy. We live in a really big world. We are more connected now than ever before. We have cell phones that let us talk to people around the country, around the globe. We can video chat with people. We have instant access to information. We amass friends on social media networks, and then we've gone all Twitter on each other, and we only talk in short chunks of texts and likes and photos. We think this makes us more connected, but it makes us more disconnected. It makes it so it is easier to ignore each other's experiences in each other's stories. But the storyteller and the audience, we can create that space, and we can have that moment of empathy. You see a hard and complicated truth in life sometimes, and you can just scroll over it, but we do not do that. And sometimes it's hard. It's hard to get up on stage. It is hard to figure out what it is that you want to tell, what truth it is that you can tell, or what you need to hold close to your chest. Sometimes, when I write a story, I can't share it for a couple months because it's just too personal at the time. And other times, it is so easy to write a story. But you know what? Those are the stories that usually aren't very good. They're usually not very good because we haven't taken the time to explore what our vulnerabilities are. And those vulnerabilities, they allow that person that's listening to have that empathy with you. So this is what I know about story and storytelling. By pushing past that easy story, by getting to the harder story, the one that's harder for you to tell, you're creating the better story. That easy story, that allows you for the point of access into yourself. But then it asks you to move past that and to be gently and safely exposed. And then it asks you to sit down and to hang up your coat and to sit with that vulnerability and that empathy and that access into the larger story and to tell that story to someone. And then it asks you to connect with that audience member in a way that is truer and deeper than most of the communications we have with each other now. That is the power and the value of story and storytelling, and we're all capable of it. Thanks.